All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Teves. Mrs. Selma Woolf for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month with immense gratitude for the refuos from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the merit of a refuah sheleima for all of those in need, in the zchus of our brave soldiers, and in the zchus of the return of all of our hostages. To thank Leah Sol for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month as a zechus for refuah sheleima for our daughter, Ilana Bas Esther, for the safety of our soldiers and for the safe return of all of the hostages and their families, to their families. And we dedicate our shir this morning, Le'ili Nishmas, Captain Harel Sharvit, Zichron Livracha, who was killed in battle yesterday. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, his Neshama will have an aliya. And of course, we dedicate all of the Maseches Bava Kamo, Le'ili Nishmas, Master Sergeant Eliyahu Michal Harush, Hashem Yikom Damo, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu provide an aliya for his Neshama and Nechama for his family. I will say with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, a really exceptional daf. So we are picking up, today's daf is Nun Zayin 57. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Nun Vav Amud Beis 5056b at the first wide line. Ikid de Amri. So remember, thank you. So remember again, we're dealing with the following sugya. We're dealing with the sugya of Shomer Shemas Shomer. Here's what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah gave us the statement. The Mishnah gave the statement that halacha l'maisa masra l'roa nichnas haroa tachtal. That after you give the animal to the shepherd, so the shepherd assumes responsibility for the animal. So we're trying to figure out what exactly that means. So if it means that when the owner gives the animal to the shepherd, so the shepherd ultimately assumes responsibility, we've kind of seen that already, and that seems to be somewhat obvious and intuitive. So the Gemara instead interpreted it to mean they must be talking about a case of where the owner gave it to a shomer, to a custodian. The custodian transferred it to a second custodian, and now the Mishnah is teaching me that that second custodian assumes full responsibility. All the Gemara says is that's very interesting because halacha l'maisa, this seems to refute the position of Rava, because Rava is on record as saying that shomer shemas l'shomer. If one agent gives it over to a second agent, the first agent retains complete responsibility. To which the Gemara says, you're right, maybe we're talking about a different case of a person who gives over his sheep to a shepherd, and the shepherd gives it over to his apprentice. Because that's the case where everyone understands that that's normal course of events. For a shepherd to give over his sheep to his apprentice, and that would be a case where the apprentice kind of assumes complete responsibility for the animal. So the Gemara now picks up Igidamri. Supposed to say first the wide lines, an alternate version of this. Midiktani, or some say, Midiktani masra l'roa, v'lo katani masra li'acher. From the fact that the Mishnah says if he gave it over to the shepherd. So it doesn't say he gave it over to someone else, it says he gave it over to the shepherd. It must mean that what? V'lo katani masra li'acher, shma mina mai masra l'roa. So what does it mean ultimately again that you gave it over to the shepherd? Masar roa lebarzilei. It must be that the shepherd is giving it over to his own apprentice. Deroa, the Gemara says, the arche deroa lememsa lebarzilei, because it is common for the shepherd to give it over to his apprentice. Aval la'acher lo, but for a shomer to give it over to a second shomer, that would not be normative, and therefore first shomer would retain complete responsibility. So let's say the position of Rava supports this. The Amar Rava, Shomer Shemas l'Shomer Chayiv, because Rava holds that Rava again. Remember, if owner entrusts Shomer A, and then Shomer A gives it over to Shomer B, that Shomer A retains full responsibility. To which the Gemara says, Amri, lo, perhaps not. Dilma orcha demilsa katani vodin la'achar. Maybe not. In other words, it could very well be that maybe we don't pass like Rava. And maybe even Shomer Shemas l'Shomer, and that when Shomer A gives it over to Shomer B, so full responsibility transfers to Shomer B. So why are we setting this up as a case over here of the shepherd giving it over to his apprentice? Because that's the normal case. That's the normal case. All right, so we'll say therefore the Gemara says there's no raya. I will say, so this is where the sugya ends. Now it happens to be in general, this is a fascinating question. So we'll say, so what is the halacha of shomer shemasra the shomer? Right? I entrust an object with a custodian. The shomer then goes ahead and halacha l'maisa gives it over to a second shomer. Something then happens to the item. Who is responsible for that? So I will say, so now listen to this. So the Rambam Paskins in Hilchos Niskei Mammon, Perek Dalet Halacha Yud Aleph. Masar HaShomer L'Shomer Acher. So I'll say, if Shomer A, so remember again the progression, I own an object, I give over the object to Shomer A to go ahead and watch it. Shomer A then transfers it to Shomer B. What's the halacha? HaShomer Harishon Chayiv L'Shalim L'Nizak, ShaShomer Shemas L'Shomer Chayiv. So we'll say at the end of the day, so responsibility remains with Shomer A. With Shomer A, V'hari HaNizak Omer Lo, Lama Lo Shamarta Ata Ba'atzmicha, Umasarta La'acher, Shalim Li'ata, V'leich V'asei Din Im HaShomer Shemasarta Lo Ata. What's the logic, I will say? The logic is, I say to Shomer A, I have nothing to do with Shomer B. I gave it to you. Why are you going ahead and giving it over to someone else? Why are you giving it over to someone else? So now, you think Shomer B was negligent? That's fine. Here's what's going to happen. You, Shomer A, are going to pay me complete damages. That's what's going to happen. If you want to recapture some of those damages from Shomer B, go for it. But I have nothing to do. I, the owner, have no relationship with Shomer B, and therefore, again, I have no responsibility to run after him for damages. So we'll say, so at the end of the day, we paskin like the Rambam, we pass like Rava, and therefore, again, Shomer Shemas L'Shomer Chayiv. And I will say, there's a beautiful mussar in this also, if you think about it. This is an incredible metaphor for life. The Ribono Shel Olam, ultimately, again, goes ahead and gives us a neshama, right? He gives us a little spark of himself, and he says, "You're the shomer on this neshama, right? We come into this world. The Ribono Shel Olam says, "Here's your soul, a little spark of me. You are responsible to safeguard that soul, to safeguard that neshama." All too often in life, what we do is we outsource our spirituality to other people. Right? I need this one to inspire me. I need this one to do this for me. I need this one to do this. Everybody else is responsible. So what do? I take that beautiful neshama that HaKadosh Baruch Hu entrusted to me, and I entrust it to someone else. And then what happens? Something happens. Something goes wrong. Something goes negative. I don't grow the way I'm supposed to grow. And suddenly again, I turn around and say, listen, not as like the phrase, not my fault. Right? It wasn't me, not my fault. Okay, something happened to the object, something happened to the neshama, but it's because Shomer B. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I gave you that neshama. I gave you that life. Who told you to outsource your success to other people? Who told you to make your success dependent on other people? Shomer Shemasel Shomer Chayiv. When something is entrusted to a shomer, that responsibility remains with that primary shomer. And if that primary shomer decides to outsource it to someone else, the owner says, that's your problem. I have nothing to do. I entrusted you because I trust you and not anyone else. So the responsibility between me and you. But at the end of the day, the buck of our life stops with us. You can choose to quote unquote vest other people with responsibility for your happiness, for your success. You could choose to say, well, this one didn't do this one, this one didn't do that. But at the end of the day, the buck of your life stops with you. And after 120, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, listen, I entrusted you and you alone with this neshama. What did or what didn't happen is solely between me and the Ribono Shel Olam. We have to stop outsourcing our success, our happiness, and our ruchnias to others, and take complete responsibility over the object, the neshama, that the Ribono Shel Olam has entrusted with us. Incredible. What says Gavaiter? Says the Gemara, very interesting sugi here. Very interesting sugi. Itmar, Shomer Aveda. So we'll say, what about a person who's watching over a lost object? Right. So this is actually a very interesting case. I'm walking. I find an object on the street. There's mitzvah hashavas aveda, right, of returning a lost object. So now I go ahead and let's say it's the kind of case where I know, a simpler case where I know who the object belongs to. So that I'm watching the object. What's my status? What's my status as a shomer aveda? So Rabbi says, I'm like an unpaid custodian. Rav Yosef, I'm like a shomer sachar. Yosef says, you're like a paid custodian. So let's analyze this. So Rabbi Amar Kishomer Chinam Dami. So Rabbi says I'm like a paid custodian. So my Hano Kamati, like, of course, some Hanas, what benefit am I getting? In other words, I'm doing a mitzvah. Kadosh Baruch Hu tells me that there's a mitzvah of Hashavas Hayid, returning a lost object. But when I go ahead and I hold on to that lost object, I'm not getting, I was supposed to say, Shomer Sachar gets a benefit. What benefit is he getting? What benefit? He's getting paid. Right, there's a Shomer Sachar, he's getting paid. So there's a benefit. Here, again, I'm watching the object because Torah tells me to, but what benefit is that to me? So therefore, I'm a Shomer Chinam. Rav Yosef from a Shomer Sachar, that means very interesting. But he says, no, you're like a Shomer Sachar. Why? It's fascinating. So Rabbi said there is a benefit. What's the benefit? The benefit is, as a Shomer Aveda, someone who is responsible for watching a lost object, technically speaking, while I'm watching it, I'm exempt from other mitzvos. That's the concept of osik b'mitzvah, patur min mitzvah. When you're engaged in the performance of one mitzvah, by definition, you're exempted from something else. So, for example, Rabbi say, that's what Rashi points out to her. That's Rashi on the page. We're doing this. It's interesting. He quotes over here the Gemara Maseches Sukkah. We actually just did this in brachas in Am Yomi. So listen to this. So since technically speaking, while I'm a Shomer Aveda, if a poor person were to show up at my house and ask me for bread, ask me for a tzedakah, technically speaking, I'm exempt. Why? Because I'm actively involved in the performance of one mitzvah, which by definition exempts me. So I will say that exemption of not having to give tzedakah, or for that, and this is just one example, but there's a cost savings in that, right? In other words, I would have given him $5. So now again, because I'm actively osik and watching the object, I don't have to give him the $5. That represents a savings. So because that's a savings, that makes, therefore, there is a financial benefit, so to speak, to this. There is a financial benefit to this shmir, to this custodianship, and therefore again, I'm like a shomer sachar. Okay, very interesting. So the Gemara goes weiter. Others interpret it in the following way. Good. So Rav Yosef Rav Yosef says, I am like a paid custodian. Why? Kevan derachmana shabdei bal karche hilchach kishomer sachar dami. So Rabbi said, this is interesting. Since the Torah kind of conscripted me in this, and Rabbi said, is halacha, if you see a lost object, you are not permitted to turn away from it. Right? In other words, I see a lost object. There's a mitzvah d'oraisa to go and to take it and to try to find the owner. So the Torah kind of drafts me into that service. So Rabbi Yosef says the fact that the Torah drafts me into the service makes me a shomer sachar, makes me ultimately, and Rabbi say, since essentially I'm hired by the Torah. Right? I'm hired by the Torah to go out and do this. I'm a shomer sachar. Basically, where it says Esther, Rabbi Yosef the Rabbah. So Rabbi Yosef brings a kasha and Rabbah. So remember again, so fundamental machlokes. Rabbi say, shomer aved, I'm watching a lost object. What's my status? Shomer Sachar or Shomer Chinam. So Rav Yosef raises a kasha to Rabbah, top of Nun Zayin 57a, says the Gemara, Hechzir l'makom shir ena, eino chayiv l'tap abba. This is an interesting case of Yosef. So now let's say, here's the situation. I find Ruvain's wallet, and I know that it's Ruvain's wallet, right? It has his driver's license inside, so what do? I put it in a place where I know that Ruvain is going to see it. Whatever, I know Ruvain goes to work the same way every single day, goes to shul the same way every day. So I put it in a place where I know he's going to pass by, I know he's going to see it. So if I return it to a place where he's going to see it, I am not obligated to concern myself with it anymore. In other words, once I put it in a place where I know he's going to see it, I have fulfilled my obligation. Nignava o avda. What happens if the object is subsequently stolen or lost? Chayiv ba'achri yusa. I am responsible ultimately for the object. Okay, so let's analyze this. My nignava o avda. What does that mean if it was stolen or lost? Lav nignava mi beisa va'avda mi beisa. I will say, does it not mean that if it's stolen or lost from the house of the shomer? From the house of the shomer. In other words, there's two different cases over here. Case number one is if I go ahead and I put the object back in a place of high visibility for the owner, I have fulfilled my obligation. Second halacha is if the item is stolen or lost from my home, from the shomer's home, I am responsible. Now, what does that show you? If I'm responsible for Geneva and Aveda, what does that make me? A shomer sachar. Remember again, a shomer chinam, an unpaid custodian, is not chayiv for gneva v'aveda. If the object is lost or stolen, he's not responsible. Only a shomer sacher is. So if I'm going to be responsible for gneva, you see that a shomer aveda ultimately again is a shomer sacher. No, Gemara says lo. Mimakom shech zira. No, that's not what it meant. What it meant was, if I return the object to a place of high visibility for the owner, and then it was subsequently stolen or lost, I am responsible. So the Gemara says, but that doesn't make sense. But that's not what the Brisa said. What the Brisa said was, once I return the object to a place of high visibility for the owner, then what? I'm done. So if it says I'm done, I'm not obligated to engage with it anymore, then it doesn't make sense to say that ultimately, again, I'm going to be chayiv if it gets stolen or lost. So it's very interesting. You're right. The Gemara says, here's the case. Kigon shechzira b'tzarayim. The case of us over here is where I put the object in a place of high visibility, but I did it so by midday. And watch this, v'tarti katoni. And there are in fact two halachas that are being taught over here. What are the two halachas? Hechzira shachris lamakom shir ena. So I was saying, now watch this. If I returned the object in the morning to a place of high visibility, ushchiach da'ayil v'nofik. Now we'll say, what's the definition of high visibility? That ultimately, again, the person, the owner, goes in and out. Person goes in and out. So in other words, I put it in a place where of high visibility at a time where I know the owner is going to see it. For example, in the morning. Then what's the halacha? I fulfill my obligation, and I'm exempt. So we'll say, so there's two things over here. Number one, I'm placing it in an area ultimately, again, lemakom shir ena, right? A place ultimately where he's going to see it, but at a time where he's going to see it, right? There's two pieces over here. Number one, it's a location of high visibility, and it's a time when I know that the owner is going to be passing by. So if I meet those two criteria, then ultimately, again, I fulfill my obligation. However, I will say if I return it, let's say again, in a place of high visibility, but what? Not at a time that the owner would be passing by. For example, I return it midday. And I will say midday, the owner's at work. Right, the owner's at work. He'll see it maybe. In other words, remember again, when would he see it? Bepashtos, in the morning when he's going to work, right, or in the evening when he's coming home from work. But if I place it there midday, even though again it's a place where the owner is going to see it, but it's at a time where the owner is not going to see it, right? He's not around. Then what? Then in that case, v'nigneva o avda chay b'achriyusa. In that case, I will say, if the object is stolen or lost, I would be responsible for the object. So in other words, very fascinating. So I'll say, so just an interesting halacha by Hashavas Haveda, because classically, we assume that what's Hashavas Haveda? I take the lost object and I put it back in the hands of the owner. That's the mitzvah Hashavas Haveda. Now what we're seeing is, there's another form of the mitzvah, that returning the object to a place where you know the owner is going to find it, that would be okay as well, as long as it meets two criteria. Number one, it's a place of high visibility for the owner. And number two, it's at a time that I know that the owner will be passing by. But if one of those two criteria are not met, and I place the object there and is subsequently stolen or lost, I am responsible for that. Incredible. So I'll say, so again, we still haven't solved our core question, which is, what is the status of a shomer aveda? Is a shomer aveda shomer zachus or a shomer chinam? Say, sitting where is the kasha? Li'olam hu chayiv ad sheyachzir ena l'reshuso. Ultimately, again, the shomer, right, the person who's watching the lost object, is going to be chayiv, fully responsible, until he returns it back to the reshus of the owner. So, ma'ili olam. So we'll say, what does that mean that he's always responsible? Lav afilu mi beso. So we'll say, doesn't it mean that even when the object is in the house of the shomer is responsible for anything that happens to the object? Even for what? Even for Geneva V'Aveda. And what that sounds like, the Bryce is telling me, is that a Shomer Aveda is what? A Shomer Sacher. He's a paid custodian. To which the Gemara says, Shema mina, ki Shomer Sacher dami. So Amarle, so he'll say this, Modina lacha, the Bali Chayim. The truth is, I agree with you, in a case where the shomer is watching an animal. Now, what's unique about the animal? So here's the case, right? I go ahead and I'm just minding my own business, walking down the street. I see Ruvain's donkey. So I see and it's wandering around. So what's the halacha? I take the donkey and I bring it home. Right? And I bring it home. So now watch this. Now the Gemara wants to suggest that halacha l'maaseh, everyone agrees that when watching over lost livestock, there's a heightened level of responsibility. Why? The Gemara says it's actually very interesting. Look at Rashi. Modina lecha, it's the first short line in Rashi. Ba'avedas ba'alei chayim. I agree with you in a case of where we're talking about lost livestock that's found. The chayiv hamotzi b'gneva va'aveda. That's the case where the shomer is going to be responsible even if the object is lost or stolen. V'lab mishum schar mitzvah, ela mishum digneva va'aveda dido pshi'usehi. And I both say, now watch this. See, normally we assume that if you're chayiv for gneva va'aveda, what does that make you? A shomer sachar. So what's interesting over here, the Gemara wants to suggest that this case is a little bit different. When you're watching over livestock, everyone agrees that you're chayiv for gneva va'aveda. Why? Back to the Gemara. Techeva dinakti lahu nigra braisa boy, so braisa boy netirusi yiserasa. See what I will say? Listen to this. We'll say this outside and read it inside. Actually, look at Rashi. Techeva dinaktu nagri braisa. Rashi says techeva shera shemilumedas hin lotzes. See what I will say? If you find a lost animal, what does that tell you about the nature of this animal already from the outset? That it's a wandering animal. Right? Obviously, again, if it wasn't a wandering animal, it wouldn't be lost. So I already see that the nature, the teva of this animal is that it wanders around. Because it wanders around, it's milumedes lotzes, it wanders around, therefore, boi nitirusa yiseras. I'm reading Rashi. Therefore, it requires a heightened level of guardianship. Higher level of guardianship. Va'afilu have shomer chinam chayiv. Now, we'll say, therefore, again, in this case, interestingly enough, we also suggest, when it comes to watching a lost animal, even a shomer chinam has a heightened level of guardianship because that's what the object demands. Rashi says, "Aval shomer aveda d'matalkli patrim gneva v'aveda." So we'll say that this is really quite fascinating. So what the Gemara is suggesting over here is, even if you hold that a shomer aveda is a shomer chinam, right? Still, what's interesting is the Gemara wants to suggest that sometimes the nature of your shmira is fundamentally dictated by the object that you are watching. So therefore, again, if you find a lost animal, you know that the teva of this animal is to wander around. So because of that, when you now take responsibility to watch over that lost object, you have to watch it in a way which is appropriate for it. For it, in this case, is the animal, lost animal. You have to have a heightened level of vigilance. And in that case, the heightened level of vigilance means you have to guard it against being lost and being stolen, even if you are a shomer aveda. Even if you are a shomer chinam. So what the Gemara is suggesting is, it could very well be, one more time, it could very well be that normally a shomer aveda is a shomer chinam. He's an unpaid custodian. And therefore he's not chayiv for gneva va'aveda. But maybe in the case of looking after a lost animal, even a shomer chinam has to guard against gneva va'aveda, because that's considered to be the act of normative watching. Very interesting. Says Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbi is the kasha of Rabbi Yosef. So remember again, we're still immersed in the same basic machlokas. Right? Still, what is the status of a shomer aveda? Someone found the lost object, he's watching over it. What is he? Rabbi, he's a shomer chinam. Rav Yosef, he's a shomer sachar. So now, Isi Rabbi Rav Yosef, so Rabbi is the kasha of Rav Yosef. Hashef, the pasuk says you have to return the lost object. The pasuk is Lo sireh shor achicha oes seyoni dachim. If you see your fellow's ox or his sheep wandering around, so don't visalamtam and don't turn your eye away from them. Don't pretend like you don't see them. Hashev tishiveim la'achecha. Return the object back to your brother. So the Gemara says, Hashev ainli ela beveso. So Rabbi says, I only know that you have to return the object back to his home. So Rabbi say, I find Reuven's sheep wandering around, so I have an obligation of a Shabbos to return lost object. So all I know is that I have to return the object to Reuven's house, to his house. How do I know that I could even return the object to his garden or to his chavasa? Literally means like ruin, or to his uninhabited area. In other words, how do I know that I don't have to dafka return it just back to his house, but I have the ability to return it back to his rishos, his garden or his chorba. Talmud lomar teshivim mikol makom. Therefore, the pasuk says teshivim, and teshivim, I will say, is a more general statement that just says, give it back, give it back. So my leginas alechavasa. So we'll say, what's the case of ginas and chavasa? What's the case of his garden? And ultimately, again, his chorba. So ilema leginas amishtameres lechavasa amishtameres. Say if you tell me that it's talking about again his gina that is guarded, right, or his chorba that's guarded, hainu beso, that's home. In other words, we'll say, remember again, what's the whole chap of your home? Your home is an enclosed, guarded area. So if you tell me that we're talking about an enclosed or guarded gina, or an enclosed or guarded churva, that's the same thing as beso, as home. Rather, again, what must it be? Elapshita, liginaso she'ena mishtameres, or l'charvaso she'ena mishtameres. So we'll say, rather, what must it mean? It must mean that I'm allowed to return it even to what? Even to his open garden, or his open churva. So we'll say, now, what does that tell me? Shma mina ki shomer chinam dami. Then I will say, now, here's what's interesting. If you're allowed to go ahead and return it back to his unguarded, so to speak, gina, or his garden, unguarded churva, that means that I'm not responsible for gneva va'aveda, right? Because if I was responsible for gneva va'aveda, I have to deliver the item to a secure area. If I could go ahead and deliver the item to an unsecured area, that means I'm not chayiv if the item gets lost or stolen. If I'm not chayiv for the item getting lost or stolen, then what does that make me? What does that make me? A shomer chinam. So you see from here that a shomer aveda is considered to be a shomer chinam. To which the Gemara says, "Amalei, not necessarily olam liginosa mishtamares luchavasa mishtamares." Not necessarily. Maybe what it means when it says that you could return it to the chorba, to the gina, it means ultimately again to a place that is mishtamares, that is guarded. I vidikakashilacha haina beso. I in that which we said, but doesn't that make it your home? In other words, we'll say a gina, a guarded gina, or a guarded chorva. That's the same thing as your house. Hakamash malon de lo ba'inan das bailim. Oh, so we'll say this is very interesting. The chiddush is that you could return it back to his rishos even without what? Even without his knowledge. That's the chiddush. That's the chiddush. You don't need das bailim. You don't need das bailim. I both say, now what's the chiddush? It's kid Rabbi Lazar. Damar Rabbi Lazar, hakol trichin das bailim. In general, again, I both say, if you give something back to someone, look at Rashi. Hakol trichin das bailim is very interesting. Gonev v'gozel, o echad me'arba shom shechziru, tzarech lo dia lebailim. V'im lo hodiu, chayiv hamachzir b'achriyus. And I both say, this is a very important halacha. In general, if you're going to return something to someone, whether it's you stole something and you're returning it, or you were a custodian and you're returning it, or a shoel or a socher, I will say you have to inform the person you borrowed from that you are returning the object, right? And if you don't inform the person, and let's say again you just leave it by their house, and something happens, you, the custodian or the renter or the borrower, are responsible. With one exception. Chutz me'ashavas aveda. Interesting, I will say the exception to this rule is returning a lost object. Returning a lost object. I will say this is very important because this is ma'asim b'chol yom. That people borrow something, or they're watching something, and they just decide to drop it off, right, and leave it at someone's house. So I will say, and then something happens. You're not allowed to do that. If you borrow something or you're watching something from someone, in order to be able to return it and be freed of responsibility, the owner must have knowledge that you are returning it. The only exception to this rule is hashavas aveda, returning a lost object. So we'll say the halachas by hashavas aveda, you could return the object to a location. Now granted, you have to return it to a secure location. Right? If you return it to a secure location, then halacha l'maisa, even if the owner doesn't know, you have fulfilled your responsibility. Now, why is hashavas aveda different? To which the Gemara says, "Chuz hashavas aveda shar ripsa Torah hashavas harbe." Because the Bava says it's interesting. The lashon by hashavas aveda is hashev teshivim la'achacha. So I'll say. So what do you see from there? Hashem teshivim means there are many avenues of return. What does it mean there are many avenues of return? However, you return it to the owner, meaning whether the owner knows about it or doesn't know about it, halacha l'maisa, you have fulfilled your obligation. And I will say, you ask yourself just misvara, right? Why is hashavas aveda different than different custodianships? It's very simple. Why? because the Torah forced you to do this. So remember again, as opposed to other relationships which I enter into willingly, right? I steal something, I've entered into that willingly, right? I borrow something, I rent something, I watch something for someone else. Those are all by consent. So since they're by consent, there's a heightened level of responsibility on me. Remember, Hashavas Haved Rabose is, I'm minding my own business. I see Reuven's lost object. Suddenly, I am conscripted into the shmira of this object. So because of that, the Torah gives me an out in a little bit of an easier way. In other words, I have to return it to a safe and secure location, but I do not need the knowledge of the owner. Quite fascinating. A lot of interesting halachas we're picking up today. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amar le Rabbi Yosef. Va'at lo tisbar the shomer aved the shomer chinam. So Abai says to Rabbi Yosef, do you really disagree with me? Do you not agree with me that a shomer aveda is a shomer chinam? Vaha amar b'chir bar Abba amar Rabbi Yochanan hatoin tainas ganav. So now we're going to go on a little bit of a detour with all of this. So now watch this. Here's the case. I go ahead and I give Reuven an object to watch. Reuven claims the object was stolen from him. Toin tainas ganav. So what's the halacha? Hatoin tainas ganav ba'aveda mishayim tashlumi kefel. Also, we'll say, let's look at Rashi just a moment to just see the full case. Tainas ganav. Rashi says, liftar asmo ayedei ganav shetoin nigna v'hemena ha'aveda shematzasi v'nimtza shebiyadahu. So we'll say, here's the case. I give an object to Reuven to watch. And Reuven claims, I'm so sorry, but it was stolen from me. And then it turns out that it wasn't. Right? Reuven has it. So Rashi says, what's the halacha? Mishali tashlumi kefel kiganav atzmo. The ganav has to pay double, just like the thief would have to pay. Kidashina beperak maruba v'im lo yimotzi aganav im lo yimtza kimoshe amar Elohu atzmo ganav. Uksibasrei Yishalim Shnayim. So we'll say, so that's the halacha. So again, I gave to Reuven to watch the object. Reuven claims it was stolen. It turns out that he stole it. He has to pay kefel. So Rashi says, I amrit pishlama shomer aveda ki shomer chinam dami mishum hachi mishalim kefel dahavi boy lemiftar nafshe betainas ganav. So we'll say, so now watch this. Let's go back to the Gemara. So here we go. Hatoin tanis ganav ba'aveda. So I'll say, so now watch this. So now this is a case of I lost an object. Reuven finds my object. I hear that Reuven found it. Reuven has it. Reuven says, you know what? I had it, but it was stolen. What's talacha? Mishalim tashlumi kefel. Reuven has to pay double. Reuven has to pay kefel. Now watch this. Now if you hold that ultimately again shomer aveda is a shomer sachar, amay mishalim tashlumi kefel. Then why would he have to pay kefel? At the end of the day, karna ba'i shlume. All he should have to pay is karen. Because Rabbi say the whole yisod of kefel is a din by a ganav, right? Ganav is someone who never really had any level of entitlement to the object. But he was a shomer sachar, which means he was being paid for his services. Then lemaisa, again, he should only have to pay karen, not have to pay kefel. So the fact that he has to pay kefel indicates to us what? That Allah lemaisa is like a shomer chinam. To which the Gemara says, Amalei, Hacham Askinon, what's the case over here? This is very interesting. The Gemara says, Shetoin Tainas Listim Mizuyin. The case here I will say is, Reuven, when he lies, it's either go big or go home. He doesn't just lie that it was stolen, it was an armed robbery. Shabbos in a Listim Mizuyin, Rashi says over here, Rashi says, Tainas Listim Mizuyin, Ganav Mizuyin, Natal Hemenu Bechazaka, Tikapater Nafshe Betainas Ones. Shabbos say this is different. Listed as your armed robbers is a kind of ones, right? How do we translate ones? Extenuating circumstance. Thank you. Extenuating circumstance. And I will say, even a shomer sachar is pater for ones. So he's making a claim over here that would have exempted him in totality. That's why he's going to be chayiv ultimately again in kefel. Amarlei listed mezuyin gazlanhu. But listim mizuyin ultimately, still, I don't understand, listim mizuyin is still a gazlan. Right? Listim mizuyin ultimately, Rashi says, or listim mizuyin gazlan, but tainas ones, patr nafshe, v'kefel betoin tainas garnavhu, dichsib rachman abos, and here's what's interesting. Kefel is ultimately shaykh not in a case of gazlan, but ultimately shaykh in a case of ganav. Remember again, Ganav Rabosai is someone who steals surreptitiously, right? Gazlon is a case of, brazen theft. Kefel is a din in Ganav, not a din in Gazlon. That's just based on the psukim. So therefore, if he's claiming listim mezuyin is Gazlon. Gazlon is not subject ultimately to Kefel. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Omerlei, Shani Omer, listim mezuyin. So I hold that listim mezuyin, kevan de mimtar meinshi ganafu. This is interesting what I'm saying. Listim mezuyin, as much as the act of robbery itself is brazen, and therefore it's Gazlon, listim mezuyin often hide. Right? They lie in wait. So because they lie in wait, there's a hidden element of this, and therefore they're like a ganav. So I'll say it's very interesting. So therefore, it's a little bit of it's kind of like a convoluted case over here, but the Gemara is suggesting over here is the case over here of where where you have someone who was watching a lost object. Now he claims ultimately again that it was stolen from him. It turns out that what? That it wasn't stolen, rather he stole it himself. He has to pay kefil. What's that case? He's claiming listim mezuyim, armed robbers, but armed robbers also have the status of ganav since they hide and they lie in wait, and that's why he's going to be chayiv ultimately kefil. Okay, Samar says Eisvei. So let's analyze this. I will say now this idea. There's a lot of things. Just to point out over here, there's a lot of stuff happening over here. What's that? Number one is still our fundamental machlokes, is a shomer aveda, like a shomer sacha, like a shomer chinam. That's number one. Now, Rabbi, we've opened up a whole other can of worms, which is, are listim mizuyin considered to be like a ganav or a gazlan? And I will say, is it considered to be like a surreptitious act of theft or a brazen act of theft? Well, what's the nafkamina? The nafkamina will be kefil. Kefil. And as I will say, only a ganav is chayiv kefil. A gazlan is not chayiv kefil. So if a shomer aveda is claiming listim mizuyin, so then it turns out that he himself stole it. Ultimately, again, is he obligated to pay keren, just principle, because listim mizuyin is like a gazlan, or is he chayiv to pay kefil because ultimately listim mizuyin is like a ganav? So a lot of stuff unfolding over here. Says the Gemara Zakasham and Beis will say lo. So 57b lo im amrit b'shomer chinam shekei mishayim tashlomi kefil. I will say right a shomer chinam. If it turns out that he stole the object, he'll have to pay kefil. Tomar b'shomer sachar she'en mishayim tashlomi kefil. Shomer Sachar doesn't pay kefil. But if you hold that the case of listim mezuyin, right, armed robbers, is ultimately again a ganav, since there's an element that listim mezuyin hide from their victim, right, until they spring on him, but the actual act of theft is brazen, but they hide in wait. So I understand. Nimsa Shomer Sachar Mashayim Tashlomi Kefil. Betoin Tainas listim mezuyin. You could have a case, ultimately again, where even a shomer sachar pays kefil if he claims listim mezuyin. Amar lehachi kamar. This is what it means to say. Lo, im amrat b'shomer chinam shekem mishalem tashlumi kefil b'chol ta'anosav. See, Rabbi say a shomer chinam will always pay kefil, right? A shomer chinam, whatever he claims, ultimately again, is going to pay kefil no matter what he claims. What does that mean? Look at Rashi. B'chol ta'anosav kilomar kol tainas sha'al yidei ganav bein mezuyin bein she'ena mezuyin dahash shomer chinam pater migneva va'aveda hilchach kishenimtza shakran mishalem kefil. See, here's what's interesting. Remember, a shomer chinam, when he claims the object was stolen, what has he done? He has exempted himself in totality. So because of that, when it turns out that he's lying and he himself stole the object, ultimately, again, whether the claim is ganav or gazlan, he's going to have to pay kefil. That's the way it works by shomer chinam. Tomar b'shomer sachar she'eno mishalem tashlumei kefil ela b'toin tainas listim mezuyin. So ultimately, I will say a shomer sachar will only pay kefil when. Now, I remember again, a shomer sachar is chayiv for geneva v'aveda. Right, so when a shomer sachar goes ahead and claims that the object was stolen from me, what do we say to him? So sorry. How do you want to pay? Right? Will that be cash or credit? Right? In other words, lemaisa, you have to pay. You have to pay because you're chayiv for that. The only case where technically speaking, a shomer sachar could exempt this. This is very interesting. The only case where he could exempt himself is where? Listim mezuyin. Why could he exempt himself for listim mezuyin? Because listim mezuyin is what? Is ones. Now, if it turns out that he's supposed to say, so the chap over here is like this. Where the shomer advances a claim that totally exempts him from all liability, then he becomes like a ganav. And if he became, let me say it differently. When a shomer advances a claim that exempts him from all liability, and then it turns out that he's lying, so effectively, what is he? He's a ganav. And when he's a ganav, the penalty is going to reflect the fact that he's a ganav. So, for example, let's just analyze this. In the case of a shomer chinam claims the object was stolen from me. And I will say, it doesn't matter how the object was stolen. What's the halacha once the object was stolen from the shomer chinam? What's the halacha? Potter. When it then turns out that he's lying and he's holding the object himself, what is he? He's a ganav. And as a ganav, what do you have to pay? Kefel. Beautiful. I mean, not beautiful, bad, but beautiful, right? Right? Now, if you're a shomer chinam, and you claim the object was stolen from you, right? What's the halacha? You're chayiv. Object was stolen from you, you're chayiv. You're a shomer chinam. Shomer sachar. Sorry, my bad. You're a shomer sachar, you claim the object was stolen from you. What's the halacha? Chayiv. You're chayiv for geneva va'aveda. Fine. So we'll say, if it turns out that you're lying and you really stole the object, we say, that actually, it doesn't really matter. I don't really care. In other words, whether you stole the object is actually stolen, you're chayiv. It's the same principle, you're chayiv. The only case in shomer sachar where this matters is if you claim listim mezuyim. See, if you claim I was held up at gunpoint, right? Robbers stole it from me. We'll say, so what's the halacha on listim mezuyim? What's the halacha? Shomer sachar, listim mezuyim? Potter. Why? What is that? Ones. Okay, so now you're potter. Remember again, because we'll say a shomer sachar is potter from onsim. A shomer sachar is potter ultimately again in extenuating circumstances. So now, if the shomer sachar claims listim mezuyin, and it turns out that he was lying, then I will say, what is he? He's a ganav. And as a ganav, what is he chayiv? Kefal. So we'll say it's a fascinating case. So therefore, again, the only time the logic is quite fascinating. So again, shomer chinam is pater and geneva v'aveda. So whenever he lies about theft, he has the status of a ganav and has to pay kefal. Shomer sachar is chayiv for geneva v'aveda. So even if he lies about theft, it doesn't really matter. He's chayiv for carrying for principle. It's only in a case in theft where he would totally exempt himself, like listim mezuyin, where if he lies about that, where he would technically be potter, he's going to be chayiv kefal. Incredible. So Eisvei, where is the kasha? V'nishbar omeis. So what's this? Remember again, the pasuk says, just to give you context, Torah is talking about a shoel, like the person who borrows an object. So v'nishbar omeis. So we'll say, so Ruvain borrows an object from me, and the object breaks, right, or dies. So we'll say the halacha is a shoel is chayiv for everything. When you borrow, you're chayiv even for ones. Chayiv for everything. Seisvei, v'nishbar omes, inli ela shvura umesa. I only know that there's liability for the shah, for the borrower, if the object breaks or dies. Geneva va'aveda minayin. How do I know that the shah is chayiv? If the object is stolen or lost as well. Amrit kavachomer. Say this kavachomer. What's the kavachomer? Uma shomer sachar, shepater bo shvura umesa. They both say now, shomer sachar, interestingly enough, is pater in a case where the object broke or died, assuming, of course, there's no pshit, there's no negligence. Chayiv b'gneva v'aveda, be'et is chayiv for gneva and aveda, for if it's stolen or lost. Shoel, shechayiv b'shvura mesa, shoel, who is chayiv if the object breaks or dies. Eino din, shechayiv b'gneva v'aveda. Certainly is going to be chayiv for gneva v'aveda. That's the kavachomer. V'zo kavachomer she'ein alav tshuva. And I both say this is the kind of kavachomer, it has no refutation. Now the Gemara says, here we go. Now remember, let's go back for just a second. What we still haven't resolved is, what's the status of listim mizuyin? Right, a listim mizuyin, ganav or gazlan. If you go with the approach that listim mizuyin is a ganav, now I both say, what's the logic for saying that armed robbers are a ganav? What's the logic? Ganav is opposed to a gazlan. They hide, right? They hide before they spring on their victim. They hide. Why can't you refute the kavachomer? You could say ikal mifrach. Maler shomer sachar shekein mishalim tashlumi kefel betoin tainas listim mezuyin. You could say ultimately again that a shomer sachar pays kefel when he claims that the object was stolen from listim mezuyin and he lied. Now I'll say that. Watch what's happening over here. What happens if a shoel, right? We'll say, I have an object, Reuven borrows my object from me, right? And what happens? He comes back and says, I'm so sorry, I was held up at gunpoint and the object was stolen, right? What do I say to Reuven? I'm so sorry, are you okay? How do you want to pay? Right? That's what it is. Why? Because the shoel is chayiv for own sin as well. I will say, what happens if it turns out that the shoel, Reuven, was lying and he wasn't really held up at gunpoint and he has the object? Whatever, still chayiv for karen. In other words, it doesn't make a difference, right? Lamaisa, because remember, he didn't exempt himself. Whereas he's chayiv for everything. Whereas remember, the only time that the shomer shall be chayiv for kefel is when, technically speaking, their claim exempted them from liability. Then they effectively become like a ganav. But if independent of the claim, you're chayiv anyway, right? So the shoel is chayiv. Even if the shoel was held up at gunpoint, the shoel is still chayiv for own sin. Right? So therefore, if it turns out that he's lying, he's still liable. So we'll say, so the Gemara says, but there is a fundamental distinction between shomer sachar and shoel. What's the fundamental distinction? If a shomer sachar says, I was held up at gunpoint, and the object was taken from me, right? Listim mezuyin, and then it turns out that he lied, he's chayiv kefel. Because that claim would have exempted him, and now that he lies, he's a ganav. Yet by a shoel, that wouldn't be the case, because a shoel, or both say a shoel, is not exempted even with a taina of ones. So this tana holds karna below shvua adifa mikfela b'shvua. Very interesting. So this tana holds that actually having to pay karen principal without a shvua is even stricter than paying kefal with a shvua. So therefore, I will say, interestingly enough, shomer sachar having to pay kefal for a taina of listim mezuyin, a false taina of listim mezuyin, doesn't make him more chamer than shoel. Because the fact that a shoel has to always pay karen, no matter what karen was, in other words, the shoel could claim I was held up at gunpoint, I had no choice, I had to give it over. We say, we're so sorry, you okay? But you're still liable. That represents a greater chumrah than the possibility of shomer sachar having to pay kefel. Incredible. Sheleimah said, well, so that's finger bright, that supports this. Hasocher parami chavira v'nignava. If I rent a cow from Reuven. V'nignava, and then the cow was stolen. V'amar halo harini m'shalim ve'eni nishba. So we'll say, so what happens? The cow was stolen, and I say, you know what? I don't want to get into a shvua, because we'll say generally again, if I go ahead and, let's say, so if the object was stolen and I can make a shvua, right, ultimately again, I could take a shvua that halacha l'maisa was stolen from me and pater myself. I say, you know what, I don't want to take a shvua, I'm just going to pay. And then I will say afterwards, this is not a case of lying. This is, I'm telling the truth, right? So I rented the ox. It turns out that it was stolen from me. I say, you know what? I don't want to take a shvua. I'll just pay. Afterwards, the thief is found. So what's the halacha? Mishalim tashlumi kefal l'socher. Ultimately, the thief pays kefal. Now, who does he pay kefal to? To me, to the renter. So the Gemara says, Savrua, suppose I take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, L'sochar, Dechevan deshileim nimtzas hagneva shelo. Because I remember again, once I paid the owner, then it turns out that effectively that what? I become like the owner of the object. So therefore again, the kefel comes to me. So the Gemara said, Nimtzas, I got Mishal Shema Kefel L'sochar. Savrua Rabbi Yehuda, does take Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar, no say schar, socher kino say schar dami, because he holds ultimately again that a renter is like a shomer sachar. Umidiktani va'amar harini mishalim ve'ein nishba. I was saying the fact that I say I'm going to pay and I don't want to swear. Michlal di'i boy patli nafshe b'shvua. And I will say what's interesting about this case is so now we're saying like a renter is like a shomer sachar. So therefore again I rented. I'm like the paid custodian for this object. The object is stolen. I say, you know what? I'd rather not take a shvua, even though a shvua could exempt me. I'd rather just pay. Now, that's interesting. Now the case that we're dealing with over here is therefore, technically speaking, I could take a shvuah and exempt myself with a shvuah. Hechidami, what's the case? Kegon detan tainas listim mizuyin. It must be a case, and I remember, a shomer sachar is normally chayiv for geneva va'aveda. So therefore, what good will a shvuah do? Rather, it must be a case where I claim it was listim mizuyin. It was armed robbers. We'll say armed robbers is a case of ones. And therefore, technically speaking, if I was willing to take a shvuah that armed robber stole it from me, then what? I would exempt myself. The katani, we'll say, so watch this case. Just quickly. Again, what's happening over here? I rented the object from Ruvain. It turns out that according to this opinion, a socher, a renter is like a shomer sachar. Right? Now what happens? I come Ruvain, I'm so sorry, the object was stolen. How was it stolen? Listim mizuyin. Listim armed robbers. Technically speaking, as a shomer sachar, what could I do? I could swear that that's what really happened, and then what would happen? What would happen? I'm potter. I say I don't want to swear. I'd rather not take a shvuah. I'll just pay the money. So I pay the money. They find the thief. They find the listim mizuyin, the thief. They will say, what's the halacha? Now the listim mizuyin has to what? Pay me kefel. Kefel. Now watch this. Shma mina listim mizuyin ganavu. I will say, what do you see from here? Remember again, I will say, who has to pay kefel? Who has to pay kefel? Only a ganav, not a gazlan. So what do you see from here? The fact that listim mizuyin have to pay me kefel, what does that show you? That ultimately, again, listim mizuyin is a ganav. So we'll say, so this is the raya that listim mizuyin, I will say, again, once again, how is listim mizuyin a ganav? How is he a ganav? Because they hide, they lie in wait before they spring up. So the act of theft is a brazen act of theft. Right? It's a frontal act of theft. But lamaisa, the process leading up to it is very surreptitious, it's very hidden, and therefore is the status of a ganav. That's why halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, he goes ahead and he has to pay me kefel. The Gemara says, I'm not going to make it to the two dots regardless. So let me just, okay, I'm leaving you a little bit here. So the listim mizuyin issue is still unresolved. I will say, what about, I don't want to close out one piece, which is, what about the halacha about a shomer aveda? Remember again, this whole listim mizuyin thing was a side topic. Right? Is listim mizuyin a ganav, is listim mizuyin a gazlan? What about shomer aveda? So I will say, so the halacha is like this. The halacha is, ubichol zman shaveda eslam nignava avda chay bachri yusa. The nensa pater sheshomer aveda kishomer sacharhu. But say the Rabban Paskins in Hilchos Gzela va'aveda parak yud gima halacha yud that shomer aveda is a shomer sachar. Like Rav Yosef. We pass that he is like a paid custodian. Why is he a paid custodian? I'll say why. Here it is. Mipneshu osik b'mitzvah v'niftar mikama mitzvos aseh kozman shu osik b'shmirasa. I'll say the Rambam Paskins like Rav Yosef. When you are watching a lost object, you are like a shomer sachar, paid custodian. Why? Because at the time that you are watching the object, you are exempt from other mitzvahs. So when ani shows up at your door, while you're actively involved in taking care of the object, you do not have to give him tzedakah. Right? Why? There's quote unquote the financial savings, and therefore halacha l'maisa, shomer aveda is like a shomer sachar. Alright, we'll say, so that, at least that piece is resolved. Our list of mizuyin like shomer, are like gazlan or ganav, that it merits to be resolved tomorrow. Both say, zchus to learn with you another week. Halavai should be again a Shabbos, a beautiful menucha, b'soros tov, a klal Yisrael. Let's say shkoyach.